Okay, so for the next couple of videos, we're going to take a look at some slightly more complex algorithms using arrays. We're going to be looking at things like a sequential search, a selection sort, and a binary search. So for this first video, we're going to be looking at the sequential search algorithm. So this is going to be very similar to the algorithm that we saw previously, where we were looking up the highest or the lowest value inside of an array. So the way this one's going to work is that the user is going to provide some kind of input to us, and we're going to use that input to check to see if it matches with any item or any element that's inside of the array. So imagine that we have an array. We'll go ahead and break this up into 4 different items. And in each one of these items, or in each one of these locations, we're going to have a unique value. So take this 28, put that in the first one. Say maybe to the next one we'd have something like 53. In the next position we got something like 76. And in the last position we could have something like 84. Okay. So if the user provides us with a value, say this 28 right here, we'll go ahead and check the items. So as soon as we see in position 0 that 28 matches with the 28 that the user provided as input, we can just immediately stop here, since we've already found a match inside of this array, and we've already managed to look up the item that they were searching for. Alternatively, if they give us a different number, say they give us a number that's not inside of the array, then what we'll end up doing is going through each item in the array until we reach the very end, and when we reach the end, we'll see that we were not able to locate the item in the array, meaning that when we provide some feedback to the user, rather than specifying a position, say like we did with this first one where we specified that it was at position 0, we would instead have to tell the user that the item they're looking for is not inside of the array. Okay, so now that we've gotten a little bit of an idea conceptually about how the sequential search algorithm is going to work, now we're going to go ahead and try to implement this. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and create a new program or a new project, and we'll call this sequential search. Okay, so for this one we'll have our class header, public class sequential search. Give it a main method, so we'll have our public static void main. And one of the first things I can go ahead and do, since I know that I want to use user input for this, I'm going to go ahead and import a scanner. So we're going to import the scanner from the util package of java.util.scanner. And then we'll go ahead and create a new scanner object here. And call this keyboard. And we're going to use this scanner object to read from the standard input stream. So we're going to use system.in. Okay. The next thing I'll go ahead and create is the array that I'm going to be looking through to try to look up a particular item. So we'll make an int array, call it numbers. And I'm going to go ahead and initialize it to these 4 values we specified here. So we'll have 28, 53, 76, and 84. So 28, 53, 76, and 84. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and include is the int variable that will serve as a placeholder when the user specifies some input for us. So we're going to have an int. I'll call this input number, and I'll just go ahead and initialize this to 0. The next 2 variables that I want to include here are going to be for when I'm going through the algorithm itself. 2 things I'm going to have to keep track of are whether or not I've found the item, and also whether or not I've reached the end of the array. So to check to see whether or not I've reached the end of the array, that tells me that I'm going to need an index of some kind that I can use to kind of step through this. So we're going to create an int index. We'll initialize this to 0, and then we'll also go ahead and include a boolean to keep track of whether or not we've actually found the item. Because once we've found the item, we can go ahead and change this boolean's value to let us know that our loop is done. We can just stop there. So we're going to have a boolean. I'm going to call this boolean is found, and this will initially be set to false. So the idea is that when we first start going through our array, we initially have not found the item, so we're going to keep this as false, and then as soon as we find the item, we're going to change this to true, and that tells us that we're done and we can exit that loop. Okay. So since we're going to be using this Boolean, that immediately tells me we can't use a for loop for this, so instead we're going to be using a while loop. So the two conditions we're checking for, the first one is that we have not found the item, and we also want to check to make sure that we have not reached the end of the array. So as long as this index we're using is less than our numbers array.length, then what we're going to go ahead and do is compare the item that the user is going to provide as input against the value at the current position in this array. So before I get into this, since I already know that I need to be using this input number, another thing I want to go ahead and include just before this is going to be this request for user input. So do system.out.print, and we'll say please enter a number, and then we'll go ahead and assign this to that input number variable. So this will be equal to keyboard.nextInt. Okay. And so now right here, what we can go ahead and do is do our if statement. So we'll just say if the value at the current position is not equal to the user's input, so say if numbers at position index, if this is equal to the input number, then this tells us that we can change our isFound, that Boolean, from false to true. So we're going to say isFound is now equal to true. So when that happens, then this condition, when we say not isFound, that will end up becoming false, meaning that we will stop running through this while loop. And then the other thing we need to go ahead and do is update the index each time. That way then if the item is not inside of the list, when we get to the end, we want to stop there. So we're going to do index plus plus. Okay. And then one last thing I want to go ahead and include with this as well is, I mentioned before that I want to be able to keep track of the position of the item if we do actually find it. So I need to introduce one last variable to this and make one small change to the logic inside of this while loop. So this one additional variable, I'm going to call this my found index. This will also be an integer since, again, it's just an index of the array. This one I'm going to initialize to -1. And the reason I'm going to initialize this to -1 is because of the fact that what I want this to do is initially be a value that cannot possibly be a position in this array. So as we know, they start at 0 and they go up to some positive amount. So -1 wouldn't really make sense. So that way then, if we don't find it and we get to the end, we can just check to see if that value is -1. That lets us know that we didn't actually find an item in the array. Otherwise, if it's something other than -1, then it must be a position that we found of where we found an item in the array. Okay. So I'll go ahead and include my curly braces right here. And so in addition to isFound being set to true, we also want to go ahead and if this comparison ends up being true, that means we found the item, and we found it at whatever index happens to be at that time. So we're just going to go ahead and say that our found index is equal to the index. Okay. And then finally down here at the end, we'll go ahead and print out one of two statements. So if our found index is equal to -1, this tells us that we did not find the item in the array. So we'll have a print line statement here, and we'll say the item is not in the array. Otherwise, if we do find it, then we can have a separate print statement. So another print line. We'll say the item is at position, and then we'll use found index as the position where we found the item. Okay, so we'll go ahead and compile this and run it. So this will be our sequential search.java, and then we'll run it. Okay, so then we'll go ahead and enter a number. So to start off with, we'll try, let's say, the very first or 0th positioned number, which is 28. And we can see this, the item is at position 0, so we see that much works. We'll go ahead and test it with the other end as well, so try 84. And we see this item is at position 3. So we'll go 0, 1, 2, 3, and we see that that's correct as well. And then finally, we'll go ahead and test this with, say, some kind of number that's not inside of the array, maybe like 99. And we'll see the item is not in the array. So it was not able to find it, and thus it gets to that condition right here. Okay, so this will complete all of the logic for the sequential search. Going into the next 2 videos, we'll be looking at both the selection sort and then the binary search.